Hell's Angel found a dying female cop. What happened next shocked the entire police force. No one expected a man wearing a death's head patch to be the reason a police officer saw another sunrise. But on a silent stretch of highway, beneath flashing red and blue lights and a sky about to break open, two enemies met, and something neither of them believed in changed forever. The first thing anyone saw was the motorcycle. Its headlight cut through the dark like a blade. The low rumble rolled across Highway 81 just outside Bryan County, the kind of sound that made gas station clerks glance up nervously from behind thick glass. Jack's rider, Malone, wasn't looking for trouble that night. He wasn't looking for redemption either. He was just riding. The cold wind pressed against his leather vest, the stitched Hell's Angels patch bowled against his back. Most people saw that patch and saw danger, a warning, a headline waiting to happen. Jack saw something else. He saw the last thing his father ever wore. The highway was nearly empty. Midnight had passed. The sky felt heavy, thick with clouds that threatened rain. Jack's preferred nights like this. Fewer eyes, fewer whispers. Fewer sideways looks when he walked into diners for coffee. As he rounded a curve near mile marker 142, something strange interrupted the rhythm of the road. Lights, not flashing, just still. A Bryan County Patrol SUV sat crooked against the guardrail, front end crushed inward like paper. One headlight blinked weakly. Steam rose from the hood. Jack slowed. His first instinct was simple: keep riding. A biker stopping at a police crash scene never ended well. Too many questions, too many assumptions, too much history between leather vests and blue uniforms. But then lightning cracked across the sky, and in that bright, unforgiving flash he saw her, 20 feet from the vehicle, lying on the gravel shoulder, not moving. His engine idled low. He told himself it wasn't his problem. He told himself someone else would come, but there was no one else. The road was empty, the night was quiet, and the officer wasn't moving. Jack's killed the engine. Silence swallowed everything except the ticking of hot metal cooling. He swung his leg over the bike slowly, boots hitting gravel. For a moment he just stood there, staring at the uniform in the distance. "Don't!" he muttered to himself, but he was already walking toward her. Officer Claire Bennett had always believed in lines, right and wrong, law and lawless, good guys and bad guys. She believed in them so deeply that she joined the Bryan County Police Department at 23, even when her mother cried at the kitchen table and begged her to choose something safer. Claire wasn't reckless. She was steady, thoughtful, the kind of officer who stayed late to finish paperwork so the morning shift wouldn't feel buried. The kind who carried protein bars in her cruiser for runaway teens. But tonight something had gone wrong. Jax dropped to one knee beside her. Her blonde hair was matted with blood near her temple. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. One arm lay twisted beneath her. Her radio was cracked a few feet away. He pressed 2 fingers against her neck. Pulse, weak, but there. Relief hit him harder than he expected. He glanced at the SUV. The driver's door hung open. The windshield shattered inward. Her service weapon was missing from its holster. This wasn't just a crash. His jaw tightened. He shrugged off his flannel shirt without thinking and pressed it firmly against the wound in her abdomen where blood soaked through the dark fabric of her uniform. "Hey," he said, leaning closer. "Stay with me." Her eyelids fluttered faintly. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Rain began to fall, light at first, then steady. Jax pulled his phone from his vest and dialed 911. When dispatch answered, he gave the location calmly, reported an officer down. His voice didn't shake. There was a pause when he gave his name, another pause when he described himself. He could almost hear the suspicion through the line. "She's alive," he said firmly, "but not for long." He put the phone on speaker and kept pressure on the wound. Blood seeped through his shirt and onto his hands. He didn't let up. Rain soaked them both within minutes. He spoke to her constantly. "Think about whoever's waiting for you," he murmured. "Think about your dog, your mom. Coffee tomorrow morning, don't quit." He didn't know why he said those things. He just knew silence felt dangerous. Thunder rolled overhead. And for the first time in years, Jax Malone was afraid, not for himself, but for the woman wearing a badge. The sirens arrived before the backup did, first distant, then louder. Then blinding red and blue lights spilled across the highway like a storm of their own. Patrol cars screeched to a stop. Doors flew open. weapons drawn. Every officer froze at the sight before them. A Hell's Angel kneeling over one of their own, hands covered in blood. "Step away from her!" someone shouted. Jax didn't move suddenly. He didn't run. He kept pressure on the wound. "If I lift my hand too fast, she bleeds out," he said evenly. There was hesitation. Paramedics pushed forward. One of them slid beside Claire and peeled back the soaked fabric. His eyes widened. "Who packed this?" he demanded. Jax nodded once. "I did." The medic didn't look at the patch on his vest. He didn't look at the beard or the scars. He looked at the wound. "It's the only reason she's still got a pulse." That sentence hung in the air like smoke. Two officers pulled Jax back anyway, not violently, but not gently either, training over trust. They guided him toward a cruiser. He didn't resist. He watched as paramedics worked frantically. Oxygen mask, IV lines, urgent voices overlapping. Claire's face was pale under the flashing lights. BP dropping, someone yelled, "Load her up." The ambulance doors slammed shut. As it sped away, rain slowed to a light drizzle. The sergeant approached Jax, jaw tight. "Start talking." Jax kept it simple. He was riding through, saw the crash, found her. "You expect me to believe that?" the sergeant asked. "Check traffic cams," Jax replied. They did. The footage showed his bike slowing near the wreck. No other vehicles, no struggle. He had arrived 12 minutes before the first official call came in. 12 minutes, long enough for a person to die alone. Jax sat in the back of a patrol car, not cuffed, not free, watching the ambulance lights disappear down the highway. He told himself he didn't care what they thought, but he did care whether she lived, and that scared him more than the guns had. At Bryan County Medical Center, the waiting room felt too small for the number of uniforms inside it. Wet boots squeaked against tile. Radios murmured softly. No one sat comfortably. Word had already spread. Officer down, critical condition, and something else. A biker. Jax sat alone on a metal bench near the vending machines. His vest had been taken temporarily for evidence. He wore a thin hospital blanket around his shoulders. His hands were scrubbed clean, but dried blood still lingered beneath his nails. Officers glanced at him, some with open anger, some with confusion, none with warmth. An hour passed. Then two. A trauma surgeon finally stepped out, pulling off her mask. "She's alive," she said. The room exhaled as one. "She lost a lot of blood. The abdominal wound severed a major vessel. If pressure hadn't been applied immediately," she paused, "she wouldn't have made it." Eyes shifted toward Jax. The silence changed. It wasn't gratitude, not yet, but it wasn't pure hostility either. A younger officer approached him cautiously. Maybe 24, barely older than Claire. "You could have left," the young cop said quietly. Jax looked at the floor for a long moment. "My dad bled out on a road like that," he answered. Nobody stopped. The officer didn't know what to say. Neither did Jax. For the first time in years, the room didn't feel divided by uniforms and patches. It felt divided by something simpler. Pain. And the understanding that sometimes it looks the same on everyone. Morning light crept through hospital windows slowly, soft and pale. Claire Bennett lay unconscious in the ICU, machines breathing softly around her. Her mother sat beside the bed, holding her hand, whispering stories about childhood summers and school plays, about the first bike Claire ever rode without training wheels. Down the hall, Jack stood near the exit. He hadn't slept. A detective had questioned him twice. Checked his record, looked for angles, there weren't any. "Why'd you really stop?" the detective finally asked. Jax thought about the empty highway, the lightning, the way she'd looked small against all that darkness. "Because she was alone," he said simply. The detective studied him for a long moment. Later that afternoon, Claire opened her eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Who?" Her mother squeezed her hand. "You're safe." The nurse leaned closer. "A man found you, applied pressure, called it in." Claire blinked slowly. "Who?" There was hesitation. "A biker." Claire closed her eyes again, processing. Somewhere deep inside, lines she had always believed in began to blur, not disappear, but soften. Outside, Jack started his motorcycle. The engine roared to life, echoing across the parking lot. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't ask for recognition. He just rode. But inside that hospital room, a police officer who had once believed the world was clearly divided, lay alive, because someone she would have once pulled over chose not to ride past her, and neither of them would ever see the road the same way again. The news didn't wait. By evening, Bryan County was buzzing. A Hell's Angel saves female officer. The headline felt almost unreal. Reporters camped outside the hospital. Comment sections split clean in half. Some called Jax a hero. Others called it a stunt, a setup, a coincidence too convenient to trust. Inside her hospital room, Claire watched a muted television replay grainy highway footage. The camera angle showed only shapes, flashing lights, rain, a tall man kneeling in the storm. "That's him," her partner, Officer Reed Dalton, said quietly from the corner. "Malone, Jax Malone." Claire studied the still image. He looked ordinary, not monstrous, not wild, just soaked, focused. Reed shifted uncomfortably. "Internal Affairs is looking into everything. The missing weapon, the crash. They're not ruling anything out." Claire turned her head slowly. "You think he did it?" Reed didn't answer right away. "I think it's strange," he said finally. "A biker just happens to be there." Claire closed her eyes. She remembered a voice cutting through thunder. "Stay with me, not rough, not mocking, steady." "Strange isn't the same as guilty," she whispered. Meanwhile, across town, Jax sat alone in his small garage apartment. His motorcycle stood in the center like a loyal animal. His vest lay folded on a table. He hadn't turned on the television, but his phone buzzed non-stop. Chapter members asking questions, outsiders sending threats, reporters requesting interviews. He ignored them all. He kept seeing her hand reaching toward the wrecked SUV. He kept hearing his father's last breath in his memory. That road, that helplessness. He told himself he'd done what anyone would do, but deep down he knew that wasn't true. Anyone didn't stop that night. He did. And now the entire police force was watching him like he'd crossed into forbidden territory. He didn't know which was worse, their suspicion or their quiet gratitude. 3 days later, Claire asked for him. The request shocked everyone. "You're sure?" her mother asked gently. Claire nodded. Her skin was still pale. Tubes still ran from her arms, but her eyes were clear. "I want to see him." Word reached the department quickly. Some officers protested, others stayed silent, but eventually a detective called Jax. He almost didn't answer. "You can come," the detective said stiffly. 15 minutes. When Jax stepped into the hospital room, the air felt tight. Claire's mother stood by the window. Reed leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Claire looked smaller in the hospital bed. Jax stopped near the door. "You wanted to see me." Her voice was soft but steady. "You stopped." It wasn't a question. He nodded once. "Why?" He hesitated. The truth felt too heavy to hand over easily. "Because no one stopped for my dad," he said finally. Silence filled the room. Claire studied his face carefully. Not the vest, not the beard, the eyes. "You could have ridden past," she said. "I almost did." That honesty landed deeper than any heroic speech could have. Reed shifted, uncomfortable. Claire swallowed. "Thank you." 2 simple words. Jax didn't smile, didn't step closer. He just nodded. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Just heal." As he turned to leave, Claire called out softly, "You saved my life." He paused. "No," he said without turning around. "You chose to keep breathing." When the door closed behind him, something unspoken stayed in the room. Not forgiveness, not friendship, but something close to understanding. And outside the hospital, cameras captured the image of a biker walking out alone. The story was no longer just about survival. It was about belief, and whether people were brave enough to change theirs. The investigation uncovered the truth a week later. Claire hadn't crashed by accident. She had responded to a call about a stranded vehicle, a man with outstanding warrants. When she approached, he ran. There was a struggle. He struck her with her own flashlight and fled in a stolen truck. The collision happened moments later when she attempted pursuit. Her weapon had fallen during the struggle. It was found 50 yards from the wreck. Jax's fingerprints weren't anywhere near it. The suspect was caught 2 counties away. The department cleared Jax publicly, but clearance wasn't the same as acceptance. At the precinct, opinions remained divided. "He still wears that patch," one officer muttered in the break room. "Yeah," another replied quietly, "and he still saved her." Claire returned to duty 2 months later. The first time she stepped outside in uniform again, the weight felt different. She drove past mile marker 142. Slowed, parked, got out. The guardrail had been repaired. The road looked ordinary, but she knew how close she'd come to disappearing there. A low rumble echoed behind her. She didn't turn immediately. She knew that sound now. Jax's motorcycle rolled to a stop several yards away. He removed his helmet slowly. "You're back," he said. She nodded. "Wanted to see it again." They stood in silence for a moment. "You ever think about that night?" she asked. "Every day," he answered honestly. She looked at him. "I was wrong about people like you." He shook his head slightly. "Don't put me in a category either way." A small smile touched her lip. Fair enough. For the first time, the line between badge and patch didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a road. And roads, she was learning, didn't belong to just one kind of person. Months passed. The headlines faded. But something unexpected happened. When Claire spoke at a community safety event, she told the full story. She didn't skip his name. She didn't soften the patch on his back. "A man most of us were trained to distrust saved my life," she said into the microphone. "And that forced me to look at my own assumptions." The room was quiet. Across the back wall, Jack stood unnoticed. He hadn't planned to come, but he came anyway. Claire continued, "Courage isn't about what you wear. It's about what you do when no one is watching." Some officers shifted in their seats. Some nodded slowly. After the event, a young cadet approached Jack. "Sir," he said awkwardly. "Thank you." Jax blinked. No one had ever called him that before. He didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded. It wasn't about becoming friends with the department. It wasn't about changing sides. It was about something simpler. Respect. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. And for a man who had grown up believing the world would always see him as a villain, that quiet shift felt heavier than applause. Winter arrived quietly in Briar County. Snow dusted the edges of Highway 81. On a cold evening, Claire received a call. Single vehicle accident, rural stretch, limited visibility. She responded without hesitation. Closed when she arrived, she saw that echoed through the frozen air. Claire stood still for a moment after it pulled away, snow settling on her lashes. Her hands were streaked with Jax's blood now, warm against the cold. For a second, the world felt like it had folded in on itself. Same road, different season, different roles. She climbed into her cruiser and followed the ambulance to Briar County Medical Center. This time, she didn't sit in the waiting room as an injured patient. She sat as someone who owed a life back. Doctors stitched the cut along Jax's forehead. A mild concussion. 2 cracked ribs, nothing life-threatening. "Lucky," the ER physician muttered. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. When she was finally allowed to see him, he was sitting upright, hospital blanket over his shoulders, just like she had been months ago. He looked irritated more than injured. "You didn't have to stick around," he said. "Yes, I did." He studied her for a moment. Something unspoken passed between them. "You applied good pressure," he added dryly. She almost laughed. "Learned from the best." Silence again, but softer now. Outside the room, 2 officers stood watch, not because Jax was under arrest, just because habits die slowly. Claire noticed. So did Jax. "You still don't trust me," he said quietly. She didn't deny it. "Trust takes time." He nodded once. "Fair." Snow continued to fall outside the hospital windows, covering roads, softening edges. Inside that room, something else softened too. Not the past. Not the history between badges and patches, but the space between 2 people who had once met in the worst possible moment. This time there was no storm, just quiet, and the understanding that neither of them would ever let the other bleed alone again. The department meeting was tense. Word had spread quickly that Officer Claire Bennett had personally escorted Jax Malone to the hospital and remained there through the night. Some called it loyalty, others called it crossing a line. Captain Harris stood at the head of the room, hands folded. "We are not here to debate who someone rides with," he said firmly. "We are here to acknowledge fact." The room quieted. Fact, Jax Malone saved Officer Bennett's life. Fact, Officer Bennett ensured Mr. Malone received immediate care. Fact, neither action violated department policy. Murmurs followed. Reed shifted in his seat but said nothing. Later that afternoon, Claire found him in the parking lot. "You're mad," she said gently. "I'm careful," he replied. She leaned against her cruiser. "You think I've forgotten who he is?" Reed's jaw tightened. "People don't just change." "I'm not asking him to," she said. "I'm asking us to see clearly." He didn't answer, because clarity was harder than suspicion. Meanwhile, across town, Jax's chapter had questions of their own. "You're getting real friendly with blue lights," one member muttered. Jax's gaze hardened. "I helped someone. She's a cop. She's a person." The garage fell quiet. Lines were shifting everywhere, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make everyone uncomfortable. and maybe that discomfort was necessary, because growth rarely feels easy. Sometimes it feels like standing in a room where everything you believed about enemies and allies no longer fits neatly, and deciding whether you're brave enough to sit with that. Spring came slowly to Briar County. The trees along Highway 81 began to bloom again, soft pink and white against clear blue skies. Claire returned to full patrol duty. Jax returned to his long rides, but something had changed in the community. People talked, not about scandal, about perspective. A local high school invited Claire to speak about resilience. She agreed, but added one condition. She wanted Jax there. The principal hesitated. Parents hesitated. But eventually they agreed. The gymnasium filled with students who had grown up hearing stories about bikers and police that never included cooperation. Claire stood at the podium first. "I was raised to believe certain people were always the threat," she said honestly, "but life isn't that simple." Then she stepped aside. Jax approached slowly. No vest this time, just a plain shirt. He looked uncomfortable under the bright lights. "I'm not here to change your mind about anything," he began. "I'm here to tell you that sometimes the choice to stop matters more than the label you wear." A student raised her hand. "Were you scared?" He didn't hesitate. "Yeah." "Then why didn't you leave?" He thought about the storm, about his father. Because fear isn't a reason to abandon someone. Jim fell quiet. It wasn't a dramatic speech. It wasn't polished, but it was real, and sometimes real reaches deeper than perfect words ever could. Afterward, a few students approached him for photos, not because he was a biker, but because he had shown up. Claire watched from across the room. She didn't see a symbol anymore. She saw a man who had made a decision, and in doing so, changed more than one life. Not everyone approved. An anonymous letter arrived at the precinct a week later. It accused Claire of compromised judgment, of blurred loyalty, of forgetting her oath. She read it alone at her desk. The words stung more than she expected. That evening, she drove out to mile marker 142 again. Jax was already there, leaning against his bike. "You get those too?" she asked, holding up the envelope. He smirked faintly. Different versions. They stood side by side, looking at the stretch of road that had tied their stories together. "You ever regret stopping?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "No." Wind moved gently through the trees. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Claire said something that surprised even her. "You know, you didn't just save my life." He glanced at her. "You forced me to see people without the uniform first." He looked back at the road. "My old man used to say something," he murmured. "He said the road doesn't care who you are. It only cares whether you keep going." She smiled softly. "Guess we both kept going." The sun dipped lower, and the highway, once the scene of violence and suspicion, felt almost peaceful. Healing doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes quietly, like two people standing on the same stretch of asphalt, no longer divided by fear. Summer brought a charity ride for fallen first responders. It was an annual event in Briar County. This year, something unexpected happened. Jax and several members of his chapter showed up, not in protest, not in defiance, in support. There was tension at first, eyes watching carefully. Then Claire rode in beside them on her patrol motorcycle. The sight stunned the crowd. Leather vests and police uniforms moving down the same road, not as enemies, as participants. Captain Harris watched from the starting line. Reed stood beside him. "You okay with this?" Reed asked. The captain exhaled slowly. "I'm okay with growth." The ride began. Engines roared together, echoing through town. For once, the sound didn't feel threatening. It felt unified. At the memorial stop, Claire stepped forward to speak. "We honor those we've lost," she said, "and we honor the moments that remind us we're stronger together than apart." Her eyes found Jax in the crowd. He didn't look away. Applause followed, not wild, not overwhelming, but sincere. And in that simple gathering, something shifted permanently in Briar County. Not every division disappeared, not every suspicion dissolved, but respect took root, and that was enough. Years later, people still told the story, not because it was dramatic, but because it was unexpected. On a quiet evening, Claire parked at mile marker 142 one last time before transferring to a new department in another state. Jax was already there. "Figured you'd come," he said. She smiled. They stood together watching cars pass. "You changed things here," she told him. "So did you." She took a slow breath. That night, I thought I was alone. You were.